So our first question is, could you please introduce yourself and explain why you are a candidate for the Oakland School Board?
Absolutely. Greetings to all of the community and to the educators. My name is Pecolia Manigo. I am a longtime organizer and advocate. I've been doing this work around education justice for 24 years, since I was a middle school student. And in 2003, I became a mother, and went from being a youth organizer to a parent organizer, really because of my passion for education justice. I come from a working class family, and I did not have a silver spoon. I did not get handed the best education possible. I had to fight and advocate for that, and found myself doing the same thing as a parent. And so I take a lot of pride and privilege in being able to have worked for different organizations to really help figure out what does systemic change in education look like. And that is exactly why I'm running for school board. I believe that over the years, as I've helped many people run for school board, that there's a need in OUSD to have parents on our school board who have the perspective of what happens in our system and how to improve our system.
All right, wonderful, thank you. And I apologize, I didn't have that up earlier. Was that readable for how
It
I
wasn't,
have?
it's okay.
Okay.
It's
You got
okay.
it though, or?
It's all good.
All right,
I had it timed in my head.
perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. Our second question is, what current programs or proposals do you feel are successful? And what would you keep and build on? And what would you cut?
Great. So I think one of the things that I believe has been really successful is trying to ensure that the district goes above and beyond compliance. One of the things that many folks don't understand is that there are a lot of laws and a lot of policies that our district is accountable to implement, most of which they're not transparent about. For example, the local control funding formula requires deep engagement from sites all the way through the district with regards to how funds are spent, how initiatives are even launched, if they're the right initiatives from a parent and a student perspective. I think we have to deeply invest in the idea of shared governance in our system, and be able to be comfortable with evaluating all initiatives through the lens of, are we having and achieving student success? And so I'm not going to lean toward, oh, we should keep this theme versus this. I actually deeply believe that we need to evaluate all programs, all initiatives across the strategic plan and across the LCAP, and determine what is really helping our students from a student and parent perspective, grounded on that. And then also take a deep look and really listen to our educators in a way that we can identify where and how our classrooms need resources and support first and foremost, and then be able to build around those critical foundations. I think that that is something I have not yet seen a district do. I have not seen that deep investment of listening to the classroom and then building supports around the classroom. And I think that's going to be really critical moving forward as we get significant investments of resources, as our state continues to have a surplus around the budget. The other thing that I think is going to be really critical is diversifying our educator workforce.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Our next question is, will you commit to rejecting donations and support from privatization-linked organizations such as Go Public Schools and the California Charter School Association?
Absolutely. I have, over the years working in Oakland, which at this point has been about 9 years, I've watched Go Public Schools evolve. I've also watched the Charter Association evolve. And I do think that we have a very different set of principles around the place of charters in the public education system. I don't believe that the initial values and the initial reasoning for charters is what currently exists in real time. And so as a result of that difference in opinion, charters were initially supposed to be a space to experiment on things that maybe policy or laws prevented public schools from being able to do. And they've now become an alternative simultaneous acting system. And I don't agree with that. I believe that public education needs to be deeply invested in, and that there are many things that we've learned that can be applied across every school. And until I see charters and I see Go Public Schools believe in that, I will not continue to or even attempt to take funds from them. I believe in being very value-centered, and my value around integrity requires that I'm very transparent, requires that I'm very honest about who supports me and who doesn't support me. And I think that that's been pretty consistent over the years.
Wonderful, thank you. Our fourth question: what is the role of the school board? What is the role of an individual school board director? And what should the relationship be between the board and the superintendent?
Ooh, loaded question to answer in 2 minutes. So the purpose of a board is to oversee two parts of the school system. One is the budget, and the other are the policies. And so the budget is all things, right? It's our funding from the state, it's our bonds, our local and measures in which we've asked voters to give us additional dollars, so on and so forth, private donations, yada, yada. And they're supposed to really have a good sense of that budget so that it aligns with their policies. And on the policy perspective, they're supposed to know the policies, that the board has passed in the past, monitor the implementation of those policies, and they do that by being in communication and supervising the superintendent to whom they are hiring on their behalf to implement the policies and to execute the budget. I believe the relationship between the board and the superintendent has to be extremely honest and built on values. It has to be a relationship, though, built on accountability. And I think that the current and prior boards, at least in my tenure here in Oakland, have lacked the accountability component for superintendents, have not been given the resources and the answers necessary to actually hold the superintendent accountable, and have very much so put us in a space of being, an irresponsible district as a result of that lack of accountability.
Wonderful.
I hope I answered everything.
I think you got it all.
Yeah.
Actually, if you want to just do a little bit on the role of individual school board director, you got about 20 more seconds.
So, the role of an individual school board director is to set up a structure in their district in which to hear from all of their stakeholders so that their decisions at the board meetings are guided through that democratic process. And so I do believe that that's a really critical component of being a board member, is that you are responsible to engage and responsible to reflect then on your decisions before making them.
Right. Wonderful. Thank you.
Most welcome.
And our fifth question: do you commit to voting against any school closures? And other than school closures, are there specific ways you can respond to possible funding shortfalls in the budget?
So I absolutely commit to voting against any school closures. I have been a very strong proponent that the district has other avenues in which to take outside of school closures. I was here when they did their first policy back in 2016 that required school closures to be an option for the superintendent. I stood then and I still stood and will continue to still stand against school closures. I think that what we have yet to see the district do is zero-based budgeting, meaning everything's off the table and rebuild, right? Again, back to that central strategy. What is in the classroom? How do we support that? And then everything else is built around the classroom. I don't see that as something that the district has done. And I think that that would be a very big component of what I will be advocating for when I'm on the school board, is to really be able to evaluate all spending in an honest and transparent way for the public to understand. I do think that there are a lot of other ways that I could answer that question in regards to details, but I won't bore your folks because I know I have that 2 minutes.
All right, thank you. All right. Our next question: what do you see as the effects of charter schools on OUSD students? And what do you believe should be the relationship between OUSD and the charter sector?
Yeah, I think the biggest impact that I've seen from parents is that there's a belief that charter is better than public. And it's a narrative that I've heard very, very often. And in some ways, I do think that charters have leaned into selling that narrative. And I think it sets up us against them dynamic in our community that is unfortunate, right? Because we know that all schools have the potential and can be great schools, right, for every student. What I think is a core challenge to be addressed immediately and very much so in this next cycle with the school board is, how do you then hold charters accountable, and how do you think that you go about the very question before, the idea of merging or closing charters, reabsorbing those schools back into OUSD. All things that are necessary will cause some harm. The question is the process in which we do it, and the honest conversations and the planning and the humanity that we center in it, right? I do think that, we cannot have as many charter schools as we do, and that they must be reabsorbed into OUSD.
Thank you. We're coming down to the final few questions.
Yeah.
Could you describe some examples and sources of environmental racism in your district and say how they have affected OUSD students, parents, and educators? And what commitments can you make towards combating disproportionate impacts of pollutant exposure on OUSD students, parents, and educators?
So, the interesting thing about District 4 is that it is a combination of a small part of the flatlands, particularly where I live, and then it goes all the way up into the hills of Oakland. And I was thinking about, wow, what a interesting dynamic to have the majority of the district above 580 and in between having 13 run through it. And the difference that is compared to 880 and the deep amount of pollution that comes from having all trucks traveling along 880. And so I do think for District 4, there is a benefit from environmental racism more than anything, because they don't have to deal with some of the pollution from our trucking industry. They don't have to deal with the pollution from our other industries that have been crowded around 880. And I think that's something for us all to acknowledge. And we've noticed that when you look at health outcomes, you see a very direct correlation to the amount of pollution in a community. And it's one of the very first issues I worked on as a young person with environmental justice and shutting down the PG&E plant in Bayview. So I do think that the benefit of 4 is that it has a capacity to say, hey, we have a benefit here, and we want to be able to support and stand in solidarity with the rest of the city around reducing the carbon footprint, the amount of pollution in other neighborhoods, because it is something that District 4 gets the benefit of, right? I think that there is a lack of unity across the city. And I hope that being elected by District 4, there's a faith in me to help bridge some of that unity, particularly around these issues where there is not as much impact in District 4.
Thank you. How would you partner with the Oakland community, including students, families, educators, classified staff, unions, community organizations, et cetera, around issues facing our schools, in particular when making controversial or difficult decisions?
Yeah, I mean, this is the hardest part about being a board, right? And what lies ahead, and what I said before, if we're talking about doing the right thing for kids, we're going to have tough choices, right? And so I think the biggest piece that I'm actually most excited about is just consistent listening, setting up an infrastructure in my district where I listen to my obviously my constituents, but also figuring out ways in which to deepen listening across the city. One of the things that I don't see a lot of board members doing are regular, weekly or monthly engagements with their community. And I'm not talking about the folks that, obviously support us, but the folks who might not, right? And having hard conversations with folks that agree with you and folks who don't agree with you. I think that there's ways that we need to create a lot of more safe space for young folks all the way from TK up. I fundamentally believe that a kindergartner, because I have had one, can tell us what's good and what's not good about things, right? And I think that there's been a real deep dismissal of our educators and our classified staff and our unions and what they can really bring to the table. We all have to work together. There's no way we're going to move this district forward, this city forward, and sustain our students if we don't work together. And that's not just even within education, but across multiple systems. We are talking about an interconnected community that's served by interconnection of systems. But those systems don't all talk. They don't all collaborate and coordinate resources. They don't all collaborate and coordinate time. We have to get there. And I do believe that that's what I've stood for. That's the work I've done for 24 years. And I'm going to continue to do it as a D4 school board director. I think that when it comes to the controversy, the piece that's most critical is the transparency. Everything has to be put on the table, and the public and the community need to understand the dynamics that the board is making.
All right, wonderful. Thank you. And then finally, and I'm going to, it says, would you like to make any closing remarks? And do you have any questions for us? I'm going to say, let's split that because I don't think we'll be airing the questions you have for us.
Okay.
But I'm actually not certain about that, but I'll
do my closing remarks, and then if there's any, I can think of any questions, I'll let you know. Right. So on closing remarks, I really didn't think I would be here. I've been asked for many years to run for school board because of my deep, consistent commitment to education justice. So the fact that I've made this decision personally and my family supports me, particularly my kids, is a really big deal. And I'm really happy to have stepped into this race. I want the public and particularly educators to know that we're going to work. When an organizer and an advocate as deeply rooted as I comes into a race, it's less about what I stand for and as much as about the structures that I set up to make sure that folks are guiding this idea of a school board director, right? And so I am inviting folks to come into the process of working to really create the unity that we need in our city, but most importantly, the unity we need wrapped around every child. I believe fundamentally that every child can have what they need to thrive. I don't do this work for any other reason but that. And so if you want to join in supporting me and trying to figure out what it does. What does it look like to be a democratically elected and fundamentally grounded school board? This is the opportunity to do that. And I'm looking forward to seeing what we create together.